suggested that I could provide information and advice to a student team starting a year-long project on bats and flying squirrels in Stanley Park. And after that project completed, I was so impressed with the quality of their research work and study report, I've tried to keep in touch with BCIT about possible student research projects in our area. And I was really pleased when, in response to project proposals submitted by Laurie Austin and I last August, that not one, but several BCIT and SFU student teams agreed to conduct studies at Coma Lake and Blakeburn Lagoons Park. It's certainly been my sincere pleasure, along with Laurie, Liz Thunstrom, and several other BMN members, including Lee Hardy, to be involved in these student research projects for the past 9 months. And so it is with considerable, and I mean considerable appreciation, that I can introduce the first of this evening's student research teams, consisting of Eva, Brian, and Dani, who will be telling us about their comprehensive bat research project. So without further ado, if I could ask the BAT team to give us your presentation.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that introduction, John. It says that I have disabled participant screen sharing on Zoom.
Oh, Eva, just hang 5 and we will make you a co-host.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. Co-host. Okay, there you go. And I'll give the others co-host as well. Thank you. And now I'm going to mute everybody. And Eva, after I do that, if you can. Actually, just go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll be starting to talk first. Thank you very much, John and everyone. As John mentioned, we worked on a study studying overwintering bats in Blakeburn Lagoons Park and Coma Lake Park. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that our study sites, Blakeburn Lagoons Park and Coma Lake Park, are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples. I think someone might be unmuted. And yes,
Everybody who's not presenting. Thank you.
There we go. Yeah, our sponsors for the cities of Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam, but we would definitely like to thank the Burke Mountain Naturalists and John for your support and guidance throughout the study. Go ahead, next slide, Eva. But today we'll be starting with a brief intro to our project, then continue with our study's objectives, study sites, methods, results, discussion and conclusion, recommendations, and finish with the question period. Now, take it away, Dani.
So bats make up the second largest order of mammals next to rodents, and they're the only mammal capable of flight. They play a really important role in the environment for pest management, for agriculture, by eating large amounts of insects. BC actually has the highest diversity of bat species in the country, with 16 out of Canada's 18 species being found here. And yet, in spite of this, overwintering bats are the subject of few studies in BC because they're nocturnal and they enter into torpor into hard to access places, making them very difficult to study. Our project is the first to study overwintering bats in Coma Lake Park and Blakeburn Lagoons Park, which provides an important baseline data set. This data set can be compared with future studies to monitor for changes in these bat populations due to factors such as climate change. This study can also contribute to long-term data sets to help biologists and managers get a better understanding of overwintering bats in Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. We used acoustic monitoring to detect bat calls through winter months and document trends to achieve our objectives.
Thank you, Dani. So the objectives of our study was to document bat species at both parks and their activity levels. And we also wanted to investigate relationships between bat activity, temperature, other environmental factors, such as relative humidity, wind speed, lunar phase, and cloud cover, as well as their relationship with vegetation structure in the parks. So as most of you guys are familiar with, we conducted our study at Coma Lake Park and Blakeburn Lagoons. And these parks are similar because they're both in urban areas. They contain water bodies, wetlands, and mixed forests. And now I'll pass it to Dani and she'll tell you guys about the methods for our study.
Thank you, Eva. So our monitoring was conducted at both the parks once a week from October 14th, 2020 until March 10th, 2021. Field sessions were conducted beginning half an hour before sunset on nights to light with no rain. And the beginning of each session, weather data including temperature, wind speed, relative humidity, and cloud cover were recorded using a Kestrel 3000 weather meter. We use an Echometer Touch 2 Pro at each park to monitor for bat calls along pre-established transects. This device records the ultrasonic bat calls that are outside of the range of human hearing and provides an automatic identification for the species. Because different species of bats require distinct vegetation structure, we used a series of point stations and transects to monitor open fields, forests, and riparian areas in different types of habitat structure. At the beginning of each transect, we monitored at a point station for 5 minutes, then continued while walking along the transect until the next transect. Transect followed along the park trails, and point stations were placed near water bodies, which provide very variable bat foraging habitat. And our bat call recordings were reviewed using Kaleidoscope Pro 5 software. This software is able to analyze bat calls by separating them into types of files with 3 groups: auto ID, which was a confirmed bat call; no ID, which was potentially a bat call, but the software was unable to identify it; and noise. After running our bat call files through Kaleidoscope, we went and manually checked all the files to visually verify they were actually bat calls and not noise. A lot of the misidentifications from Kaleidoscope came from jangling keys. And verified bat call coordinates provided by the Echometer were exported into ArcMap, and areas with high densities of bat calls were classified as hotspots. The hotspot data were used in combination with the LiDAR to assess trends between bat activity levels and surrounding habitat. LiDAR was used to visually assess the vertical and horizontal vegetation structure of the parks. We used the elevation classes from LiDAR files to assess vertical structure, and the profile tool in ArcMap for horizontal structure. Now I'll pass it off to Eva to tell you about our results.
Great, thank you, Dani. So I'm going to start off by going over bat species detection trends for Blakeburn Lagoons. So from October 14th to March 10th, we conducted 24 monitoring sessions. And in those monitoring sessions, we were able to detect 102 bat calls. So bats were often detected in October with an average of 10 detections per night, and then detections declined in November and December until we reached no detections during January 2021. Bat detections slightly increased in February, and they were most frequent in the first 2 weeks of March with an average of 18 detections per night. The average monthly bat detections followed the same trends as ambient temperature, and the most commonly detected bat species at Blakeburn Lagoons Park was Uromyotis with 78 detections. Detections of Uromyotis were common during October, then became less frequent in November until early December, and detections decreased to 0 in late December and January, then increased in February and reached their highest number of detections in March. Californian myotis followed a very similar trend with 23 detections, and 1 silver-haired bat was detected on November 1st, 2020. Now, for bat species detection trends at Coma Lake, we were able to conduct 23 monitoring sessions between October 14th and March 10th, and that gave us a total of 31 verified bat calls at Coma Lake Park. Bat detections were highest during October with an average of 8 detections per night, then decreasing in November. In December, no bats were detected, but calls slightly increased in January and February, and an average of 1.5 bats were detected in March. The average monthly bat detections followed the same trends as ambient temperature. The most frequently detected bat species at Coma Lake Park was Uromyotis with 13 detections, and detections of Uromyotis were most common during October, and there was 1 detection in February. California myotis were most commonly detected in late October, early November, and March with 11 detections. There were more silver-haired bats detected at Coma Lake Park with 5 detections. 3 of them were in October, 1 in January, and 1 in February. 1 western small-footed myotis and 1 little brown bat were both detected on October 25th. Now we'll go over bat call detections and temperature, their relationship to temperature. So myotis were detected, surprisingly, at some very cold nights. So we had myotis detected on a night that was negative 0.5 degrees at Coma Lake Park and as cold as 1.35 degrees at Blakeburn Lagoons Park. California myotis were detected on nights with a temperature of 6 degrees at Blakeburn Lagoons Park at 6.35 at Coma Lake Park. However, since these bats were detected on such cold nights, on nights with over 10 degrees, they were much more commonly detected. Silver-haired bats were detected on nights with temperatures as low as 5.4 degrees Celsius at Coma Lake Park and 5.7 degrees at Coma Lake Park. And we performed a two-tailed statistical t-test, which confirmed that there is a weak correlation between ambient temperature and the number of bat detections. Bat detections occurred most often during warm nights in October and March at Blakeburn Lagoons. Detections varied as temperatures cooled through November, and in December, temperatures remained between 6.3 degrees and 7.5 degrees, and bat detections fell to 0 per night from December 17th until February 24th. Temperature did not dramatically increase after February 24th, but bat detections increased each night. The highest number of detections occurred on March 3rd with a temperature of 9.1 degrees and 32 detections. Detections at Coma Lake Park were also most frequent during October, with the highest number of detections being 11, which was reached on the warmest night recorded with 15 degrees temperature on October 28th. From November 7th until January 20th, no bats were detected and the temperature dropped to around 6 degrees, an average. Although there was no significant rise in temperature, 6 bats were detected from January 20th until March 10th. Other trends, we also looked at other trends and their relationship to bat detections, and relative humidity ranged between 33.2% to 88.9% at Blakeburn Lagoons Park and 26.7% to 86.2% at Coma Lake Park. All moon phases occurred during the study, and wind speed usually stayed below 1.5 kilometers per hour, and cloud cover also varied during monitoring session. Despite us monitoring these other factors, there was not a correlation detected between the number of bat detections we received and these weather factors. When we're looking at the vegetation survey for Blakeburn Lagoons, we were able to detect bat detection hotspots at the beginning of transects 1, 2, 3, and 6. There were 32 wildlife trees counted at Blakeburn Lagoons, and there were also forested areas at each side of the lagoon and in the southwest quarter of the park. Shrubby riparian vegetation was also present throughout the park. When looking at the vegetation survey for Coma Lake Park, 15 bat recordings were found in the northwest riparian shrubby area of the constructed wetland, and the rest were dispersed through the study site. 19 wildlife trees were counted at Coma Lake Park, and Coma Lake Park also contained a deciduous wooded area that contained many canopy gaps reaching up, and trees reaching up to 34 meters. So now I'll pass it over to Brian to talk about the discussion and conclusion.
Thank you, Eva. So first we're going to talk about the bat species and some of the trends with those. So at both parks, we had California myotis and Yuma myotis. These were expected at both parks because they remain in BC over winter. However, silver-haired bats in BC were previously assumed to move to warmer climates outside the province during winter. But more recent studies have suggested that silver-haired bats may migrate from northern parts of BC to the southern parts, but don't actually leave the province because of the warmer climates. One little brown myotis and one western small-footed myotis were detected at Coma Lake Park and have been detected in the province before. However, auto ID software can confuse different bat species, and with only one detection each, we're not confident to say that these two species were present in the park. Results from our study suggest that Californian myotis, Yuma myotis, and silver-haired bats detected at both parks may have entered a deep state of torpor during the cold months of December 2020 and January 2021. Torpor is when a bat lowers its temperature, heart rate, and metabolic function in order to use less energy. Bats typically enter torpor when there isn't much food. However, new research suggests in temperate regions such as BC or the lower mainland, bats may use daily or intermediate torpor to wake and forage when insects are available during winter months, which could have been what was happening at both parks. Bats were detected periodically during our study from October until early December 2020, and then started again in February 2021. Which could indicate they were using daily or intermediate torpor. So our different environmental factors, relative humidity, moon phase, wind speed, and cloud cover did not appear to affect bat detection significantly, as seen by the graphs on the left. However, temperature appears to be the predominant factor affecting bat detections, as shown by the weak upward trend on the graph on the right. Californian myotis, Yuma myotis, and silver-haired bats were detected at each site near their typical habitat by water or forest. We attribute the differences in the number of detections between the two sites to three factors. So available surrounding habitat, light, and noise. Coma Lake Park is next to a busy road, and Blakeburn Lagoons Park is not.
Okay.
It has been documented that roads can have
Sorry,
a
John.
negative impact on bat use of surrounding habitat. Blakeburn Lagoons is less affected by artificial light and light pollution than Coma Lake Park, since Blakeburn Lagoons has a less urban surrounding area. Blakeburn Lagoons Park is closer to forests, fields, and rivers, which all have more habitat for bats. Coma Lake Park is very urban, therefore the surrounding area has less additional high-quality habitat for bats. So some future study recommendations. We recommend the use of a passive bat call recorder like an Anabat for future studies. An Anabat could allow for detections during other nightly emergencies, such as midnight or before dawn. It would also reduce the dependence on monitoring sessions for acoustic recordings. We also recommend research on the plant and insect communities at future study sites when doing vegetation surveys. New research suggests there is a difference in insect use of native versus invasive plants. Since all local bats are insectivorous, surveying plants and insect species could provide more insight into the quality of foraging habitat for bats at study sites. Now on to Eva to talk about the management recommendations.
So for management recommendations, we recommend more vegetation management, especially at Blakeburn Lagoons Park. So if you guys have been to Blakeburn Lagoons Park, which I'm sure many of you have probably noticed a lot of willows growing along the shore of Blakeburn Lagoons. And during the majority of our study, point station number 3 was very overgrown with willows and no bats were detected there until March 3rd. So on March 3rd, the willows had been cut back before a monitoring session, which opened up the area for the first time. And we were able to detect 18 bats there in that one night, which is the highest number of myotis detections at a single station in one night at Blakeburn Lagoons. And myotis bats like to forage in open areas above water. So we believe that cutting the willows created suitable habitat for their foraging behavior. And due to the increase in myotis bats that were detected immediately after the willow was cut down at P3, we recommend continued maintenance and landscaping of shoreline vegetation to ensure suitable foraging habitat for bats.
So in summary, temperature was the main factor that affected bat detections in our study. Bats may have been using intermediate or daily torpor in both parks because of the warmer climate. Noise, light, and surrounding habitat could be contributing factors for the differences in the number of bat detections between each park. Finally, we recommend future studies use Anabats and conduct insect surveys and vegetation surveys, documenting native and invasive plants. And we recommend managers conduct stronger vegetation management practices at Blakeburn Lagoons Park if they want to increase bat use of the park. Thank you all for listening. Are there any questions?
Yes, I had a question for you. I really appreciated the overview, and it first a comment and then a question. It certainly correlates well with a lot of the recent research over the last couple of years that BC Parks has done in the Okanagan. We're finding that there's much more winter activity than we ever thought in the past, and part of that is due to climate change. I just wanted to ask, first of all, what was the most interesting thing that you discovered in doing this project?
Ooh, there's a lot of interesting things we discovered.
Okay, give me a short list.
Short list. I think when researching bats and like looking at different pictures of bats and seeing just like how different their ears and faces have all evolved to like have the best hearing for echolocation possible. I think that was one really interesting thing to see along research. And then also I think it was really cool when Dani and I were monitoring and we were able to see when the willows were cut back and how much of an effect that had, and we could like see the bats flying above our head once that habitat opened up for them.
One anecdote, I was talking to my coworker today and he was saying that bats actually breathe through their wings because it's just like one cell layer, so there's actually oxygen exchange between the blood vessels in their wings. That's pretty interesting. And for silver-haired bats, it was especially interesting for this study because they're very evasive and there's not too much research that is done about them. Not many colonies have been found in Canada. There's one in New Brunswick that was found a couple of months ago, but in general, they're understudied and not well understood. So it's really nice to see them in both of our parks.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add on to that, what you pointed out about bats being able to breathe through their wings. A recent study by a PhD postdoctorate professor at University of Toronto indicated that the good news is myotis bats such as little browns and Yuma can breathe up to 12% through their wings actually. The bad news is with white nose syndrome, that's one of the challenging things why they think that these bats in particular are so badly affected by that, because the fungus can get on the wings and interfere with taking away 12% of their breathing in essence. And the other point I just wanted to add was you're right about the silver-haired bats. We've had several interesting reports in the last couple of years of silver-haired bats being found in wood piles in the Coquitlam area, Tri-Cities area. And you're right on the mark, as I suspect that these are bats that are coming from northern BC and they're staying in the Metro Vancouver. Like, why bother going to Mexico when I can have a nice warm wood pile right here? And it also confirms my finding in early March. I found quite a few silver-haired bats foraging at Blakeburn, getting ready for their trek north. And so a lot of your findings they have a great deal of relevance. And I'm so glad you're able to do that project.
Yeah.
I've got a quick question. Were you surprised to find bats in November and early December? I certainly would have been. I had no idea that the bats were around then.
Yeah, definitely. It was really cool being all bundled up in layers and layers and still getting bats.
Yeah.
That was something that was really interesting. It wasn't really expected, but it was cool to getting those results.
It actually, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the Stanley Park studies that have done in previous years have found them all throughout the winter.
Oh, really? Wow.
They found in Manitoba during the winter, there was a freak increase in temperature, and they had a series of moths that came out in the middle of winter. And the bats turned out to be very opportunistic. Somehow they found out about these moths and they came out to be able to get some more energy to last in hibernation. But we know so little about what they do in the winter, and it really can change how we manage bats a lot better to find this information out.
I have a question. I was wondering, how does the summer population compare? I'm just curious, is it the same number of bats, or what percentage more would it be in the summer?
I think John would be able to answer that
Yeah.
question.
Certainly during the summer, we know that Yuma and Little Brown, California, at Blakeburn Lagoon every night, you're probably looking at least, as a conservative estimate, 50 to 75 bats. And we know for a fact, due to bat research that we've supported, that these bats are coming from 2 kilometers away and from a maternity colony in Pitt Meadows. So that's one of the stops that they have. At Coma Lake, we've done foraging surveys in the past, and I would say easily 50 to 75 bats every night forage in that area. So these are incredibly valuable foraging areas for the bats. And the students' comment about the willows is something that we've also been discussing with the city, is that, as most of you know, anyone that's walked around Blakeburn in the last 3 years, there's been a monoculture of willow and alder trees now developing, and bats love grassy foreshore areas because they can actually herd the insects towards the grass and then increase their abundance and capture them much easier. But when you have willows, it makes it much more difficult to grab insects around there. So Eva's point and the students' point about better management of the foreshore area, I think, is a very important recommendation to bring forward to the city.
I have one other question for the students. Were you able to determine where the bats were coming from? Were they coming from on site, or do you think they were coming from a different place where they would have been going into their torpor, their deep torpor?
That's kind of a hard question to answer, because it's hard to tell where they're coming from, because a lot of bats, kind of like what John was saying, will they'll roost 2 kilometers away and then they'll come here to forage. But yeah, but both study sites have qualities that would provide roosting habitats. So wildlife trees and trees with slewing bark that the bats could roost in. So it does have potential. And also Blakeburn Lagoons is closer to the Pitt River and also closer to more natural areas. And we were also wondering if maybe that's why we got more detections at Blakeburn Lagoons as well, because it was still urban, but close to some non-urban areas.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you, Brian or Dani, would want to add on to that?
So the question was just that, what was the difference between the 2 parks? Sorry, I was responding to a direct message.
I just wondered if you were able to determine if any of the bats were coming directly from the site, if they maybe had a roost in one of those parks, but maybe that's something still to be determined.
I think that was a bit beyond the scope of our project. We were just kind of detecting presence or not present. But that would be something really interesting to look at. If that was maybe a long-term study that could be done, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, I was kind of curious about Coma Lake Park, since there was one, the one silver-haired was detected at several different spots in the park. And I don't know, there's just not that many of them. So I was kind of wondering if that one might be nearby, since it was detected. There was several detections of that species, but I don't know, unfortunately.
Also, yeah, sorry, just to add on to that one more time, when I was doing my research, I came across a paper that said, I think it was California myotis, but you're less likely to detect them away from their roosts. So then if we're detecting them, then that also indicates that they would more likely be roosting near the site.
Yeah. Well, I can't hear you, Susan, for some reason. If you mute yourself and then unmute yourself.
Is someone trying to ask a question?
I think Susan.
Yeah, I was trying to ask a question.
Okay. You've muted yourself, Elaine, again.
Maybe you can type it in the chat, Susan, but whoever spoke up, if you can ask
Oh,
your
there you
question.
are, Elaine.
Yeah,
You're back on.
okay. Yeah, I was just, your results are very interesting, and I'm wondering if you presented them to the Parks Committee or the cities of Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam.
We did, yes. And we also have a big report that we'll be sending to them too.
Are there any other further questions or comments?
You mentioned white nose syndrome, John, earlier on. Any indication of it being in this area?
Maybe the students could comment on that.
I don't think it's been detected this far out, but I think there's some worry that it's moving a little bit more west.
You still could be approaching.
Yeah, it's within 100 kilometers of the lower mainland, the latest recording, and it's, they think that it is possible to have come to British Columbia already, but we just don't have enough detection in place of that. But there have been confirmed cases in Washington State, at least 4, with the latest within 100 kilometers. Okay, on behalf of the Burke Mountain Naturalist, I just wanted to thank you again for your wonderful presentation and your dedication. My gosh, 24 monitoring sessions out late at night in the dark, that's a lot of dedication, and your research is very important. I'd now like to turn it over to Lori, who's going to be doing the introduction of the next student team, I believe.
In the meantime.
Thank you once again.
We'll give them a clap.
Yeah.
And thank you
Well
all
done.
as well.
Well
Thank
done.
you very much. I'm really happy to introduce our second group of presenters tonight. Students who were in the joint BCIT and SFU Masters of Science program last fall. And 4 of them are here out of 5. One colleague, Pradeep, couldn't make it, but we have Maddie, Edward, Sara, and Varsha. And as John mentioned, Liz Thunsturm and I submitted a proposal to BCIT for students to study issues within the wetland habitat at Coma Lake Park. And Liz and I had noticed a decline in bird populations during our Christmas bird counts, as well as a decline in nesting birds over the last 10 years or so. And we hoped we would gain some insights through a study. So we were really happy when BCIT accepted, and that there were actually some students interested in our project as well. And Liz and I were just so impressed at how well the students managed to work together on their restoration plan for Coma Lake under the COVID restrictions, doing quite a bit of it online and using online tools, and just a few on-site visits by the students who were living in the lower mainland. And I want to add that 2 of the students were not even near Coma Lake, and one was even in the US, and they managed to pull this all together, which is, you know, really something. So then they had to consider the stakeholders. We, Burke Mountain Naturalists, had a certain point of view that, you know, we hoped that they would take a look at. And then there was the city of Coquitlam, and they had some requirements for BCIT as well. So they pulled it all together, did a fabulous job. We have a wonderful report that they've given to us, which will really help us in working on further restoration, hopefully with the city of Coquitlam. So Liz and I really enjoyed collaborating with the students and receiving their report, and I hope you enjoy their presentation tonight. So over to you.
Wow, I've never had such glowing praise, nor have I ever been introduced. Thank you so much, Lori. Can everybody see my screen? Yeah, just a thumb. Lori, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Awesome. So good evening, everyone. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment and respectfully acknowledge that we are looking at Coma Lake Park, which lies on the unceded and traditional territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam First Nations, as well as the territories of the Coquitlam First Nations. We would like to thank you all so much for being here and willing to hear about our presentation. We were really, really, really excited when we were invited to come do this for you all, especially because this project was done in our very first semester of the Masters of Ecological Restoration. And we actually completed this project about 4 months ago. So we're really happy to bring the presentation back, look at it, practice it a couple of times, and bring it right back all to you. And we did want to say a special thank you, yes, to the Burke Mountain Naturalists, but also especially to Lori and Liz, who were just absolute angels and so helpful to us throughout the semester. We really couldn't have done this project without their support. So like Lori introduced us, my name is Maddie. I'm joined by my colleagues, Varsha, Sara, and Edward. And we are going to give you a presentation on our collective restoration plan for Coma Lake Park. So today we're going to give you a little bit of background on the current conditions at the lake and why this site is in need of restoration. And then we're going to dive right in and discuss the key stressors and treatments along with each of their monitoring, maintenance, and public outreach. Because the reality is that there are a number of stressors that are impacting this park in the southwest corner of Coquitlam. This is in part because it is super popular as a recreational site. Now, can you all see my cursor?
Yep.
Perfect. So as you can see on the map, there are a ton of amenities. A walking path right around the lake, a couple of fishing docks here and here, a playground, and there's also things like a wetland that's super important to wildlife, and the park itself is home to a variety of species. So there are a lot of interactions between park users and the ecosystem. So as a result, we've seen decreases in the water quality, waterbirds, and the vegetated bank. And while it's definitely not our goal to restore the habitat back to a bog, we do want to mitigate some of the impacts we've found within Coma Lake Park to achieve something we like to call the best attainable conditions. And to do that, we're going to talk about a number of key stressors we found and talk about their treatments and long-term monitoring. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Sara.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Sara A, and I'm going to talk about yellow flag iris. For those of you who don't know this plant, it is an escaped ornamental iris, and it is very invasive. It spreads very quickly, and it creates monocultures. So we found iris in 2 areas of Coma Lake. One is the wetland, and the other is the shoreline on the banks of the lake. So let's just start with the wetland. So in this photo, you can see the plants that have all been trampled in the foreground. That is all yellow flag iris. In the background, you can see a little sliver of water, and that is the stream running through the wetland. Now, the point of the stream and the point of the wetland is to filter stormwater. And what's happening is the iris is invading the stream, making it smaller and reducing the ability of the stream to filter the water. So this means more pollutants and sediment are entering Coma Lake, decreasing water quality. It is also crowding out native plants that waterbirds use to make nests. Now we also have the shoreline population. We found 13 pockets of yellow flag iris around the shoreline. And what they are doing is producing seeds that help colonize other areas. So one yellow flag iris plant can produce more than 200 seeds. So if we only removed the wetland population, the shoreline iris can actually reseed these areas after it's removed. And also Coma Lake is a headwater to the Fraser River. So if they are not managed, the iris can and possibly already has established downstream. So what can we do about this? We have some solutions. It would be really difficult to remove the wetland population by hand because it's so large. It's over 30 square meters. So instead, we recommend using a benthic barrier. And all that is a rubber sheet that is placed over trimmed down plants of yellow flag iris, as you can see in this picture. The method is really easy to install, it's easy to maintain, and it works. So by keeping the plants covered after 4 months, not only do the plants die, but the root system also dies, so the plants don't regrow. And we think this would make an excellent project for school children, especially because from installation to removal is exactly 1 school term. So you can really see the results in a short amount of time. The shoreline population is more scattered, so that can be removed by hand, but the entire root system will need to be removed. And the city of Coquitlam already conducts weed pools, so we recommend integrating that into the same schedule. All right, so now let's talk about long-term management. The reality with invasive species is they need to be continuously managed. I mean, that's just the way it is. The shoreline populations will need to be removed multiple times before the root system is exhausted. And so in order to do that, volunteers will need to know exactly where to look to remove the same roots from the same locations. So we recommend the use of the Avenza app. If you haven't used it before, it's really great. It works on any smartphone. It's free to download. And what it is just a GPS map, as you can see in this photo. And you can create pins or drop little red circles of where the locations of the yellow flag iris are. So you can easily navigate to them. And so we recommend doing at least yearly monitoring and continuous removal of the plants. So now I'm going to talk about the second issue, which is unvegetated banks. So we found 6 unvegetated banks around Coma Lake, just like the one in this picture. So there's a couple of issues with these banks. One, because there's no grass, all of the soil and the particles have nowhere to get filtered through to before they reach the lake. So that means every time it rains, the sediment goes immediately into the lake. And this has a really negative impact on water quality. It impacts the invertebrates that waterbirds feed on. And also it causes erosion. So in this photo, the ducks are actually sitting in what once was bank. So the rocks that are sort of to the north of them was the original shoreline. And what's happened is because there's no vegetation to hold the soil in place, we're actually losing soil and losing ground. So what do we recommend? Well, we recognize that park users stand and fish on the banks, so we don't want to completely limit access to the water. So we recommend planting 70% of the bank with vegetation and leaving 30% for access using stepping stones. And you can see in the picture, we recommend planting slough sedge. So slough sedge is a native wetland species. Water birds eat the seeds, so it actually provides a food source as well. And it's very low growing. So it's not going to impede views of the lake. So people will still be able to fish and enjoy it. Also, it forms really thick mats. So it'll be able to hold the soil together and prevent erosion, and also act as a natural filtration for those sediments that I was talking about. Okay, so for monitoring, we recommend using the same Avenza app I discussed in the invasive species section, because when you're looking at yellow flag iris, you can just look over and see how the banks are doing. They're right next to each other. And you can make note of areas where the slough sedge has not grown in. Maybe areas that have higher traffic may need to be replanted before they can actually grow in. So we hope that by adding vegetation, it will not only see an improvement in the water quality, but it'll also beautify the park as well. All right, now I'll hand it over to Edward to talk about stormwater.
Thanks, Sarah. Hey, everyone. My name is Edward. Now, when discussing stormwater, the first thing we need to make sure we understand is that, yes, Coma Lake Park is an urban park. So it's going to be subjected to urban inputs. Particularly, urban stormwater is going to be a serious pollutant source for this lake. Now, every time somebody is driving their car, or washing their car, or fertilizing their lawn, some of that can wash up in the lake. And that can bring with it phosphorus, nitrates, heavy metals, sediments, and other pollutants, which will decrease water clarity and harm aquatic insects, fish, and birds. And it will also contribute to algae growth, which will make the pond not look very good at all. So what do we want to do about this? Well, we want to reduce it, and we want to increase the water clarity of the lake. We should go back to the last slide. We want to increase the water clarity of the lake as kind of an indicator that the water is improving. One measurement we did on site was we found using a Seti Disc, which I'll describe later, that the water clarity was only 56 centimeters, which is less than half of the Government of Canada's recommended minimum of 120 centimeters for recreational users. Now, going on to the treatment plan for this. as Sarah previously mentioned, the wetland should filter some of the stormwater. But there are some spots, such as the discharge pipes, which we should also address. At these discharge pipes, we recommend producing or creating some bioretention cells. As you can see from the figure on the right, these are actually pretty simple. You just have a wooden structure with some soil on top, some pea stones in between, and some gravel at the bottom. And we can plant Baltic rush in these sites. The native Baltic rush in these cells will take up some of the nutrients and contaminants and store it inside themselves. Likewise, because it's a native plant, it may provide a little bit of habitat for birds, or maybe some birds, insects, maybe a little bit of food for some species, and just kind of help overall. Likewise, because these bioretention cells are very simple in design, we think that this is another area where we could get students involved in Coma Lake Parks management. They could easily construct these boxes, install them, and then when they're going through the park with their family or friends, they could point at them and say, hey, I built that. I helped Coma Lake Park. So monitoring and long-term management for this site, again, it's another opportunity where we can involve local students. One thing they can do is use the Seti Disc that I briefly mentioned earlier. Pictured on the right is a Seti Disc. It's very simple. It's just a disc that's painted black and white. You lower it into the water from a string, and the point at which you no longer see the disc is the clarity of the water. Getting these measurements should be done ideally with the same person in the same conditions, because if it's darker outside, you'll lose sight of it sooner. But it's a decent way to understand water clarity. Likewise, another way we can see the water quality conditions improving over time is if the aquatic insects are doing well. One simple way would just be if there's a greater diversity of species of aquatic insects, then it's probably doing a little bit better. And you can simply catch aquatic insects with a hand net, running it through the muck on the shoreline or through the plants, and just counting the species in a bucket, which students can surely do with their field notebooks and get some great experience with that. But even as we're seeing things improve, we really have to emphasize that this is a heavily impacted urban lake, and these improving results may improve things a little bit and ideally not get worse, but we can only reach the best attainable condition. Now that I've discussed stormwater a little bit, I'm going to pass it off to Varsha, who's going to focus on nesting habitat.
Thanks, Edward. Hi, everyone. As Edward mentioned, I'm Varsha, and I will be talking about the lack of waterbird nesting at the Coma Lake Park and how we can improve this. So historically, the lake has been an important site for both local and migratory waterbird species. However, in the recent years, the bird sightings have been declining because, as discussed earlier by Sara and Edward, a lack of native vegetation and poor water quality. These two factors are likely responsible for reducing the habitat quality for waterbirds. Native vegetation is being displaced by yellow flag iris, which can be seen in this figure on the right. The dominant yellow flag iris is in the foreground in the red square, and the native cattail is in the background. This is a problem with the increasing yellow flag iris because bird cannot use this plant, yellow flag iris, as a nesting material. So to provide more nesting opportunities for the cavity nesting waterbirds, we suggest installing nesting boxes. So the two species we will be targeting for our nesting box are the hooded mergansers and the bufflehead ducks. On the left, the black and brown bird is an adult male hooded merganser, and on the right is an adult male bufflehead duck. Nesting boxes for these birds will be made of cedar wood, as it can provide proper insulation and prevent overheating. The boxes will be drilled onto the trees in the wetland. The nesting boxes will be positioned at least 6 feet above the ground level and will have an aluminum metal sheet around the trees to deter any potential predators. And the boxes themselves will be at least 30 meters or 100 feet apart off each other to reduce the competition among the birds that might be using the boxes. So what will these boxes look like? In these two images here, you can see a very common nesting box design where there's an entry hole closer to the top and a roof extends out. And in the image on the left, you can see a baby hooded merganser. I found this image on the internet. But yeah, that's a hooded merganser baby. The nesting boxes will have a small door on the side. On the left image where there's a number 10 written on it, that's a door, which swings open outwards for easy cleaning and monitoring of the birds. To build these boxes and to encourage more community involvement, we recommend collaborating with high school students. We suggest installing nesting boxes in February, so before the breeding period starts. So the students can work on the nesting boxes as a class project in their semester 1, which is usually from September to January in Coquitlam School District. And in terms of long-term monitoring, the boxes will be monitored throughout the year via presence and not detected surveys. We will be using eBird, which is a bird sighting database that can provide real-time data about bird distribution and abundance to keep track of any bird species that might be in the park or using the nesting boxes. So here's a screen capture of eBirds displaying the bird sighting last year in November at the Coma Lake. And some of the sightings here have been recorded by our own Lori. And during the nesting period, the boxes will be monitored every 10 days from March to June. And for the rest of the year, we'll be monitoring them at least once a month to remove any invasive species that might be present and just general cleaning. Volunteers such as Burke Mountain Naturalist Group or students who have helped build the nesting boxes can potentially help with the monitoring process as well as routine maintenance and cleaning. And we hope by adding the nesting boxes, it will encourage the birds to come back to the Coma Lake. And I'll pass it on to Maddie, where she can talk about how we can mitigate park user impact and get even more community involvement.
Thanks, Varsha. Yeah, so you've heard a lot about, all these stressors in the park, but how do we help mitigate the impacts that we have in this recreational area? Because when you walk through Coma Lake Park, it is pretty clear that it is a well-loved area. There are people playing in the playground, they're fishing on the docks, they're soaking up the sun. But you can also see people feeding the wildlife and stepping on vegetation and interacting with the ecosystem in a way that looks positive at the surface, but can actually have some pretty negative effects. And this is likely because park users simply lack the information needed to make wildlife-friendly choices. Now, this may be due in part to the current signage at the park. Now, for our purposes, we have classified signs as either management or interpretive signs. Now, management signs are those that express what behaviors are prohibited within the park, such as you can see on the right, feeding the wildlife. Now, currently, these signs are in areas of lower traffic or are nestled within bushes that keep covering them. Then we have interpretive signs, which are there to educate park users about the wildlife and surrounding ecosystem, but haven't been updated in a number of years and have likely become outdated. Now, it's important that we adjust both types of signs so that park users are aware of their potential impacts on wildlife. And if we can do that, then all the other restoration projects we've talked about before are more likely to succeed. So with that, our final recommendation is to improve the signage around Coma Lake. Current do not feed the wildlife signs within the park are located at the south parking lot and at both fishing docks. Now, we suggest that the size of the signs are increased. We suggest improving the design and moving them next to the walking path to make them much more accessible. We also suggest adding an extra sign at the northwest corner of the park, as it's both close to the wetlands where waterbirds are present and close to the grassy areas where Canada geese can be seen. Now, by installing these signs in these locations, we can hopefully increase the number of interactions that park users have with them and thereby decrease the number of people who are feeding the wildlife. Interactive signs, on the other hand, they will hold a similar purpose within this area. Now, if we educate park users on the Coma Lake ecosystem and its wildlife, we're actually hopefully increasing their understanding of and respect for the area. And as such, would expect to see a decrease in harmful actions such as vegetation trampling and littering. Now, for this, we recommend that we install one interpretive sign right here at the wetland adjacent bench to inform people about the importance of the wetland for the ecosystem and the wildlife, as well as to mitigate interactions between fishermen and waterbirds. Now, we're also recommending that we update the interpretive signage at each parking lot, but rather than having us design it, we thought it would be a great way to engage the community and showcase local talent. So we also recommend holding a competition for the greater community to create those updated signs so people can get involved. Not just Burke Mountain naturalists, not just students, not just employees of the city of Coquitlam, but absolutely anyone who would like to participate can. And we think it would be a great way for people to even learn a little bit more about that park that is in their neighborhood. Because at the end of the day, Como Lake Park is a recreational site. It is beloved by many, and it acts as an important habitat for local wildlife. The goal of this restoration project is not to make this park completely wild, nor is it to allow park users free rein. Rather, the ultimate goal of this project is to reduce the human-wildlife conflict and find a balance where the integrity of the recreational space is maintained. And we were really, really happy to be able to work on that over a 3-month period. So thank you all so much, and we'll take questions now.
Great presentation.
Thank you so much, all of you. I just admire your passion and your excitement about the project, even though it's a few months back now. Does anyone have a question for the students?
I have a question. I grew up next to that lake. We used to drag the canoe down there, and there used to be a big island actually in the middle of the lake where ducks and geese would lay eggs and things, but that's another story for another time. While you were talking particularly about signage and interpretation, one of the changes I've seen in our neighborhood over time is a significant diversification in different ethnic backgrounds, immigrant communities. And I sometimes wonder about the different ecological values that people come with when they migrate here. And I know in some areas people are taught to fear the wilderness or fear nature, that it's a threat. And so I just wondered if any of your thoughts around signage or education incorporated some of those diverse ethnic background types of challenges.
That's actually a very good question. So before I was a master's student with SFU and BCIT, I actually spent a lot of time working in interpretive delivery with the Vancouver Aquarium. So we met. Yeah, very cool. Nice to have somebody else. So I used to do like a lot of programs and run the carts. You probably know what I'm talking about. But as you know, we often get many guests and visitors from a diverse group of backgrounds and stuff like that. And so we don't mention this in the presentation because the presentation is an adaptation of what we did for our original class last semester. But one of the ideas that we put forth as a recommendation was that in the summers, especially during high volume periods, we would actually have someone almost akin to an interpreter. And so that would be somebody, I mean, post-COVID willing, right? Because we don't want to get, within 6 feet of each other. But we thought it'd be a great idea to like have some volunteers, especially high school students who needed to fulfill their work experience, or even just somebody who wanted to do it for a few hours every day. We could have people going out for the park during those high periods or high group periods, and actually like help educate people on like why Como Lake is so cool, what you can expect to see, what it's connected to, all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And obviously all this stuff is very preliminary and suggestions like that. And we didn't really think to include a lot of diversity, but I would expect that with those kinds of volunteers and stuff like that, we would train them to be able to speak through like a large equity and diversity. We'd have these kinds of training opportunities for them, that we'd be able to meet as many people as we could to get a little bit more passionate about wildlife.
Sure. Yeah, no, and I mean, it's a big thing. I just in listening to you, I just thought that, did that sort of, were there any discussions around that? But yeah, no, and you're saying volunteers in Coquitlam has a Park Spark program that does that sort of thing. So yeah, okay, thank you.
I can add on to that a little bit. I think there's a lot of potential for the sign contest to get people who are both familiar with the cultures and the language to be able to design the signs that not only translate the words, but kind of translate the culture a little bit too.
Just to add to that, there are some of the signage around the fishing area is in several languages. So I think that's something the city is quite aware of as well and would really take that point into consideration. Who else has a question?
I do.
Kathy.
Yeah, I'm curious about the boxes that the young man was talking about. Because right now, does the water just go straight into the lake? Because I see some erosion in some pipes that look like they're draining into the lake. So would the boxes go underneath the pipe? I'm not quite sure how all that's gonna work.
Right, so there are more drainage pipes than the ones that we chose to address. So we only chose to address the ones that run through the grass because we could actually dig in the grass and put them down there. The reality is if we want to get all the pipes on the site addressed, that would be a multi-million-dollar project that would involve digging up all the roads. So it's kind of like, it really emphasizes the best attainable condition thought. So if we can get 3 out of 4 pipes or 2 out of 3, that's better than getting 0 out of 3.
Yep. Okay, I get it. Thanks.
Okay, we have another question from Christina Saremba in the chat. Have the students received any feedback from the city of Coquitlam? If so, did they indicate that they may be interested and willing to implement any of their recommendations?
So Lori, I think you can answer this the best because after after we sent out the report, you did meet with them and they responded. So
yes, I have been talking to the city about several of the recommendations. So we're in process right now. We were allowed one trip into the park to do a bit of a weed pull, which Sara participated in. Thank you, Sara. And we're hoping to do a bit more, but we are under restrictions. We were only allowed 6 people to work at a time. But I've also asked about many other aspects of your project, when we can put some of those forward. So I'm waiting to hear back. So we are in conversations about a lot of the things that you've suggested. So I'll let you know when something happens. Are there any other questions?
I think, Elaine, did you still have a question? I saw you've been putting your hand up a lot.
Yep. Yeah, I do. Just on, that's a great report. Just on a historical note, I should point out that I think it was back in the 1980s, the Burke Mountain naturalists were involved in a plan to naturalize the shoreline at Coma Lake Park. And the city at that point proposed planting yellow flag iris, which we objected to, but they chose not to listen to us. And to me, it's a bit surprising that the yellow flag hasn't spread even further than it has in all those years. The other thing that we had recommended to them is that they put up nest boxes, and we did install some nest boxes, but to our great disappointment, we found that most of those nest boxes were vandalized over time. And we didn't have a great deal of success in having them used, as I recall.
So perhaps when there's a bit more of a restoration of the wetland, that might be a more appropriate time to look at nest boxes again. I think Jane has a question next.
Yeah, she'll need to unmute.
What I have seen at Coma Lake Park is children love to feed the birds, and people choose to disobey the signs to see the joy of their children feeding the birds. Oh, it's just this one little bit, it won't do them any harm. So they choose to disobey. So I don't know what one could do about that.
I can actually answer that because I've converted a few people away from feeding the ducks when they used to think, oh, I like feeding the ducks. And it's actually kind of dark. So I was fishing at a lake in Minneapolis. I'm the one who's from the US. I was in the US during this project. You know, I was fishing at this lake, fishing for carp, get a few of those invasive species out. And it was at a spot where people regularly feed the ducks. And I saw this family come up. They brought some bread. They were feeding the ducks, feeding the ducklings. And I got to spend the next minute or two watching a duckling choke to death. And I got to watch how it would suffer for about 30, 40 seconds, you know, trying to breathe, trying to get the bread out of its throat, and then its neck just folded. And not long after that, I saw another family with more kids coming in to feeding the same family of ducks. And I did notice that the mother duck looked at the duckling that had died. You know, initially she was kind of stressed, like, oh, my duckling's having trouble. But as soon as it died, the mother duckling was kind of like, you could kind of tell from the mother duck's behavior that she'd seen this before. So I think for people who choose to disobey it, we kind of have to be honest about just how bad it really can be for the wildlife. You know, people might want to feed the ducks, but I don't think they want to kill them. And it really can't kill them.
Thanks, Edward. I think it does come down to more education.
I think too, and I'd like to add on to that too. I think one of the big things too with what Edward's saying is we do absolutely have to be honest, and it's one of those tricky ones because you absolutely don't want to shatter a kid's worldview. Like you don't want to, especially if they've been feeding ducks for forever about bread and stuff like that. You never want to be like, actually, you're going to kill them, and that comes in with that training with those interpreters. Really just giving that education in a way that is constructive and moving forward their more understanding is kind of the approach that we want to go with. So both with the interpreter who'd be in the park, you know, just being like, hey, actually, there's a lot of ways that we could really help these animals out rather than just feeding them, because they get all they get a lot of nutrients from the food that they get in the wild. And then also maybe adding just like a quick blurb on the signs about like, hey, like here are the reasons that we want to be careful about feeding them. And here are other ways that you can have a good impact on those animals instead. Here are some other ways that you and your family can enjoy the park. So just really putting a positive spin on that kind of stuff is going to go a long way to helping us make positive connections with the community and also having a positive effect on the wildlife.
Are there any other questions?
At the Rifle Sanctuary, they supply good food that is good for the birds.
That's a great idea.
To feed.
Yeah, I wasn't something we considered, but absolutely. And you know what, if we could even just tell them, here's some good foods alternatives that you could feed them in small doses. Yeah. And then of course, there's obviously like, we don't want to get them too used to humans. So there's always that balance, but moving forward in small steps and kind of getting people more used to it is absolutely the thing we want to get towards.
I think the city has a different view on the geese for sure at Coma Lake, because there is a bit of conflict there too, with the geese trampling the shoreline and messing up the lawns where people might want to picnic, and so they have some issues around that too. And right now they have fenced off a lot of the access to the water to keep the geese away. And last time I was doing a bird count there with Liz or with some other folks there, there were only a few pairs of geese, and that wasn't the case last year. So that I think the city is trying to limit the numbers of geese that are residing at the park right now. Anyway, are there any more questions?
No, I just want to say I'm glad to hear that, because I have walked across the grass and then been shocked at the state of my shoes.
Yeah.
So thanks for telling us that.
Okay.
So I'll answer a question in chat that we got. There are two questions in chat. One was about feeding the birds. We already got that. The other one is the vegetation planting we suggested in some areas. How sturdy are the plants? There will be little feet walking to the water's edge. Can the vegetation endure or fade to dirt? There were two things that we did that kind of addressed this. One was getting the plants after they've grown a little bit. So we're not just planting baby plants. You know, there's a little bit more sturdiness for wildlife that might be interacting. The second is we're actually thinking of having a fence up there to block off the revegetating shorelines just for a while. So it is an issue. Monitoring to make sure they're growing and not falling apart would also be a factor here. But yeah, we just have to fence it off.
Okay. Well, the best part of this discussion is that we're just getting so many more ideas to help solve a problem. And I just appreciate the students' work so much. And I want to thank you for presenting tonight to our club. So I wish you good luck in your future studies and careers. And also, I'd like to just say welcome to the students who have actually joined our club for the next year. So we welcome you and hope that you will enjoy being part of our activities. And hopefully we will get back to some sort of normal soon and be able to go on outings together. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And now I'm going to turn it over. Yep, let's give them a clap. And I'm going to turn it over to Ian now, who will review some wildlife sightings for the past month. Thank you.
So great. So, well, we can just open up the floor and people can turn on their mics and talk about any wildlife sightings. And then we'll, Brian, do you know roughly how many photos we have tonight?
We've got about 35
Okay.
photos to go through. So do you want to do that first? And
Maybe we should.
yeah. Okay.
Are you ready to go?
I'm as ready as I'll ever be.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's get into the wildlife gallery. So just hold a moment and I will share my screen.
We're sort of in relief. Light on this side, dark on that side.
Share screen. There we go. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Wildlife gallery. Okay. Well, let's go. And as I skip through them, the contributors, if they could have a few words.
Oh my, that's gorgeous.
Blakeburn.
That would be great.
Wow.
Wow.
Hi, yeah, this was at Blakeburn Lagoons, and unfortunately they decided to do their little mating sort of dance in the field by the school rather than.
Oh, sorry, my bad. My bad. There we go.
That's
Can you see my screen still?
Yes. And Ellen can talk if she likes.
Oh, yeah, these sandhill cranes were doing a bit of a, I guess, a mating display. The male had picked up a stick and he jumped into the air and threw the stick into the air and then came back down and was really trying to get attention of the female. Unfortunately, they did all of this sort of in the field by the school, so the background isn't all that nice. But anyway, that's the way it goes.
That's spectacular.
Mm.
Oh my goodness, the Sara.
That's a good one, yeah.
And this is a sorrow at Colony Farm.
The duck pond.
Oh, excellent.
It's clear of stick.
Yeah.
Great photos. Susan.
Well, this is one of two adult beavers that I've been seeing in Coquitlam River Park. And I think the next photo might be the baby. No, that's another adult grooming itself.
Yeah.
There's the baby. So unfortunately, I haven't seen the baby for a while. And one evening I was out there and I saw a mink swimming around. And I didn't get a photo of the mink because it was raining. I didn't have my camera. But since I've seen the mink, I haven't seen the baby. So I think the mink and the
Is it
baby.
possible?
Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
Is Chris or Evelyn with us tonight?
Oh, look at that.
That's one of those
That's-
house-
yeah.
I
Oh,
didn't notice their name, but
wow, that's beautiful. That must be John.
John's there.
Where's the Swan Dyke Trail? Where that platform is?
Pit Boulder, I believe.
Okay, thanks. Keep my eyes peeled.
Oh,
That's nice. Where was this photo taken? Does anyone know?
Catesy Marsh.
Wow. That's really unusual.
So
Yeah.
that's northern Pitt Meadows.
And taking flight.
Yeah, that has to be.
Yes.
Diane.
Oh,
Showing away.
I certainly know where this is.
Diane, did
Yeah, this was by Noons Creek Hatchery, and I was talking to Dave Benny, and I happen to get, and when we were walking on the shoreline trail, there was a fisheries fellow with us, and he said, "Oh, let's look over here because we might see some fingerlings." I think they would be coho. Would that be right? And he said for about a year they are under the gravel and they stay in that freshwater area for many months. So if he hadn't been there, we wouldn't have been looking. We wouldn't have seen that tiny little fingerling. So that was exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is compliments to Jeff Rudd. I don't know if he wants to talk about it, but this is a dipper's nest that's on the Coquitlam River, not too far downstream from the fish hatchery. And so we were probably there for half an hour or so watching this dipper. You can see it on the rock, and it would come back with some food. It would sit on the rock for a little while, and then it would fly up to the nest and quickly unload its load and then come back to the rock. And that rock, but the dipper would rack up the rock and then fly off afterwards. It was quite interesting to watch. And this is probably a series of 3 photos. Jeff and I were out for a walk in Upper Coquitlam River Park, and I just stepped over this little stream outlet from the archery pond, and Jeff goes, "Oh, look, there's fry," and they were being trapped. That someone had sort of dug out a little outlet from the archery pond, and the water was flowing, just barely trickling out, but then the water was just disappearing. So the fry that had probably just come out of the gravel were coming down this little outlet and then getting trapped. So Jeff jumped in there with his hands, and he dug right into the gravel and was picking up sometimes 5 fry at a time and then releasing them back into the archery pond. And I got my hand. That's
oh goodness.
There's one of them.
And so I got my hands in there as well, so I got to save some fish as well. It was probably about 30 fry that we saved, and I think Jeff was saying that they're probably coho fry.
Yeah. It happens a lot, particularly in Hyde Creek. Hyde Creek dries up amazingly, and there's always having to do fish rescues there, fry rescues from the trapped ponds downstream.
It's quite amazing how the fry will. We thought they were all gone, and then we got in there with a stick and moved some of the gravel around, and up popped some of the fry, like they were digging into the gravel.
Yeah.
And this was an outing doing trail work on the Burke-Widgeon connector with my wife Deanna, and we spotted this little Pacific chorus frog on some like club moss or something like that, and we would have never seen it if it hadn't moved. But it was really cool to see.
Right.
Oh goodness.
Oh, well, I was out just behind my place, and I heard this huge noise of crows and an owl in great distress. And eventually I saw the owl fly through the trees, and Then a while later, when I came back, the owl was sitting on the path, right down on the ground, and then it just flew up into this low tree and posed nicely for me. So I was glad to see that it was okay. I don't know if crows will actually harm an owl, but it was really in distress.
Great.
Beautiful shot.
Yeah.
Oh, and these are evening grosbeaks.
Yeah.
Last year, I had a flock of about 21, I think was the most I counted in my yard. And this year I've counted up to just 9 so far, but it's just wonderful to have them back. They're such beautiful birds.
No, I'm not seeing any around here.
Having a feet. Nora.
Oh, yes. So this was one of the female flicker that I saw in my backyard. And there was, this was my little episode that I mentioned before about there were 2 males that were gesturing at each other, and in the nearby tree there were 2 females gesturing at each other. And I watched that, must have been for close to an hour. They would sit absolutely still staring at each other, and then suddenly they'd do some gesturing. And I found it quite odd because it was 2 females doing it in one tree and 2 males doing it in a different one. There's one of the males.
Yeah. I did get your video. It was very good quality. It would not have streamed well, so.
Oh, too bad.
Yeah.
I was very excited to actually get a little video, so it was
Yeah.
it was
No, it
very
looked great.
cool.
Yeah. And there's a nice, beautiful close-up.
Look at that.
Mhm.
Drop right on the.
Yeah, little whiskers.
It was pretty exciting. That maple tree has been, and I don't have photos this time, but that maple tree is absolutely chock-a-block with Wilson's warblers and a black-throated warbler and Townsend, I think it's warblers. And I looked it up because I thought, why are they in the maple tree? It's not seed time. And it said that, or I read that Wilson's warblers are insectivorous. And when I took a close-up of the maple tree flowers, they were full of bugs. So I still have to email John Reynolds to say, is that right? Or maybe somebody else here knows. Do Wilson warblers eat the insects in maple trees?
Wilson's warblers already. Wow.
It's crazy. It's this time every year, and there's about at least 20 to 30 of them. Anyway, next person.
Yeah, Jim.
Go ahead.
We were at Minnekada for a walk and met a very nice young man who told us he'd seen a garter snake eating attempting to eat a frog. So if you look very carefully, you can see he's got one leg sort of partly.
It's quite a large frog.
It's quite a large frog. Definitely is one of those things of having bitten off rather more than you can chew. So I've no idea how long that was going to take. And for some reason, the other painted, the 2 painted, Western painted turtles disappeared when I tried to send them.
We had a nice close-up of them.
Yeah.
We can't seem to find it.
No, there were 14, we counted 14 of these. Yeah. Big ones, little ones, and ones in between. And this was at Colony Farm on Tuesday. There were 2 mama wood ducks, one with a brood of at least 9, and the other with 6 little ducklings. So, I mean, that was lovely to see. Oh, and Jim's pride, Savannah Sparrow, who flew onto the bush. Jim
just
spotted
posed nicely in all directions. It looked at us, turned sideways, looked that way.
Yeah.
So he did a good job for us.
Gorgeous.
And the how did the cinnamon duck decide that it would blend so well with the coffee colored water?
Unfortunately, it was against the sun, so it's not a good picture.
But still.
It shows it, yeah.
Now, we don't have a picture, but I feel we have to share this story. We were walking along the path and coming away from the two ponds, and a red-winged blackbird flew down into the ditch and went from lily pad to lily pad, lifting the lily pad, the edge of the lily pad up and peeking underneath. And of course, by the time I said to Jim, put it on video, of course, the blackbird had moved on. But has anybody else seen anything like that?
Seemed quite human. He was picking up the insects from the underside of the next lily pad.
Yeah.
It's very clever. He did it many times.
Yeah, unfortunately, we looked at a lot of other lily pads and didn't find the same. And we really did see it. It was, most amazing.
Unusual, yeah.
Okay, is Jeff with us this evening?
Yeah. I just have one in my mind.
Okay, due warning.
Well,
I will let Jeff take on from here.
Okay, I wasn't sure if this would pass the censor. So, and I had some diffidence about showing these, but I thought, well, this is part of natural history. So here we have a couple of centipedes. This is just down by the Coquitlam River a few years ago, but this is a themed package of about 4 shots here. So those are Harpathi haydenianas. Next shot. Oh, now these are a couple of grasshoppers, and you'll notice
identities will remain secret.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
There's a one-track mind, isn't he, rather?
Well, as I say, it's a package. So this was actually at 7,000 feet up northwest of Pemberton, and these guys are incredible because I tried to sneak up to get the shot, and they took off, and it was on a steep slope, so they actually jumped about 10 feet in this position, which I found quite remarkable. Okay, next slide, please. Now this is in Susan's backyard, and I've never. Sorry. It's on a glass and a raised bed. Now, Susan found these, and we actually have a video of this, and it's wrong to laugh at other creatures, but it was almost impossible not to, because as the female was walking along, the male was waggling side to side, and just hilarious. So yeah, but as I say, it's wrong to laugh. Next slide. And now this is a fairly common sight, but the unusual thing about this was in December, and you see this all the time during the summer months, but to see it in December was I found quite remarkable. So thank you.
And that's it. Sorry, that's my temper.
I wanted to say, as I recall from my biology a long time ago, don't grasshoppers actually have like a lock and key mechanism where they're actually locked together, that like they couldn't separate if they wanted to? Seem to recall something about that. It was probably Larry Dell.
No idea. Okay, so thank you all so much for sending in your photos. I actually really enjoy putting these together. Getting a preview of the photos that are sent in is just fabulous, and putting them together in the slide deck is just fun. So I really appreciate everybody doing that. Get it in early, a couple of days cut off before the next meeting. Totally appreciate it. And yeah, just send them to Birkmountain. That's at gmail.com, and you can have your 15 seconds of fame.
And just to add to that, Brian, we encourage people that are submitting photos that they come to the meeting, so they can explain about the photograph or tell a story about it. So it makes it that much more interesting.
Absolutely, because there's usually a backstory to every photo. So totally true. Yeah. Okay, I will stop sharing. And I guess now verbal wildlife sightings, if they weren't covered in the slide deck.
Might be a little late, but I'm just curious because you guys know all about the wildlife in the area. I've been in BC for about 6 weeks, and about 5 weeks ago, I thought I heard an elk bugling at like 5 a.m. a little west of Burnaby Lake. Just kind of curious how far these elk will get.
I wouldn't have thought it would have been elk myself. Upper Pitt, they have elk, and Vancouver Island. Anybody else have comments on that?
I don't know what else it could be.
I think I've heard that there's elk moving into more urban areas. There was an elk spotted in Maple Ridge last year or a couple of years ago. So it could have been. I know they're moving into more urban areas lately.
Yeah, I think that elk in Maple Ridge was probably one that originated in the Upper Pitt River Valley, and they were introduced there a few years ago.
Yeah, quite a few years ago now.
Yeah,
like probably over 10 years ago.
I think so. Yeah, that's right.
What kind of sound do elk make?
Edward?
Can you sing us a few bars?
No, I definitely can't.
Somebody mentioned
yeah,
a train.
Yeah, it didn't sound like a train.
Yeah.
It definitely sounded like an elk bugle. So it was kind of like maybe some birds might imitate it, but you know, it was like 5 a.m. and I know that's supposed to happen sometimes at 5 a.m.
Huh. Curious.
Maybe a train. Who knows? Yep. Any other sightings? If not, I'll pass.
I was just looking in the chat and that where was it? Neil saw a juvenile red-tailed hawk on Blossom Creek at the end of March. And a lot of thank yous and that, and a few people had to leave early. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, maybe given the time, we've gone a little bit past 9 o'clock. I'm just going to give a little bit of a quick blurb for our next show and share, which is Wednesday, May 26th at 7 p.m. via Zoom, of course. And I'll be giving a status report on the bird survey that's being conducted in the field that's being impacted by the Trans Mountain work at Colony Farm. And you might have read a bit about this in the newsletter. So this survey is being conducted by several BMN members and our friends. And I'm also going to be making a pitch for more people to join in the survey. It's a great time to join in. Just today, lazuli buntings have returned to Colony Farm, and this is the field where they breed. But just because time is so short, what I wanted to say is this season, the lazulis are going to be able to breed undisturbed because Trans Mountain work has been suspended at Colony Farm until mid-August because of nesting birds. So we're just over the moon about this. But anyway, we'll have more news for you in about 2 weeks' time, May 26th. We don't have a presenter for the June show and share. Anybody who's interested, please contact Ian MacArthur. Our June club meeting is June 10th, and we'll have bee enthusiast and nature planting expert Josh Thompson, and he's going to be talking about the interconnections between native plants, and a really interesting guy, and it will be an interesting talk. And we've finally gotten around to updating the website a bit, so please go to the website and see what else is going on in the area. And does anyone have anything to say before we say goodnight and thank the students one more time? I really enjoyed this evening. Thank you so very much, all the students and everyone for their wildlife sightings.
Absolutely. And thanks for sticking around for the rest of the show.
Yes. Thanks very much.
Great.
Okay. Good night.
Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah.
Good
night.
Good night. Good night. Thanks, Brian.